one of the things that we have to consider, if I'm going to say I'm going to prove that God exists, we have to say what would constitute a proof of the existence of God. You know, what if I could have a being appear in the air here and say to you, "I am God"? Would that convince you? See? I mean, David Copperfield could probably do that. So, it is an interesting question, really. What does it take to prove that God exists? So, although in Islam we talk about the 99 attributes of Allah, the scholars, or some people say 100, but the scholars have said the actual attributes of Allah are infinite. But theologians, which is, theology is like the study as a science of religion, have come up with what they call the 4 primary attributes of God. They've looked at everybody's religion, whether the religion specifically says it or not. They say that these 4 attributes are prime to existence of God. That if these 4 attributes existed, God would exist. And the 4 are: to be eternal, to be everywhere at once, omniscient, to be all-powerful, omnipotent, and to be all-knowledgeable, omniscient.
Omnipresent.
What was that one going to be?
Omnipresent.
Omnipresent. So, regardless of such attributes as mercy and justice and such things as that these are considered to be primary attributes because I think you can see, because of their nature, why they might be called primary. And everybody's religion in the world accepts that God has these 4 attributes. I mean, say for instance somebody didn't accept God was merciful, but they would still accept God had all of these attributes. Now, before I hope you don't mind, I know some people can't see me when I sit down, but my back is very sore because of my illness, so sometimes it's hard to stand. I was going to say what... anyone remember what I was going to say?
All religion agree on 4.
Yeah, no, I just said that, and I was leading into something else, and I thought I could take a minute and sit down while I say this. This is terrible. Of course, the pressure I'm under now makes it almost impossible to remember. I'll just talk about something else and I'm sure it will come back.
This was your human. This was your human.
So, on the word eternal, to be sure we have a common understanding on the word eternal. The word eternal in English can have different meanings. Say for instance, my talk was really boring, right? You could say, wow, his talk seems eternal, meaning like it just goes on forever. But eternal in the sense of theology does not mean to go on forever. Eternal means to be outside of time, to to not be involved in a flow of time. May have to stand up again.
Absolutely.
Oh, you know, so I stood up and remembered it. As I start to sit down, what is going on? It's like
Allah wants you to stay.
I'm going to have one more try. I'll stand over here and say, you know, this just shows how remarkable human brains are, you see. I mean, I know this thing that I want to tell you really, really well. And because somehow or other of circumstances, it just got sucked right out of my brain for the moment. I'll just go ahead and deal with the first one, which we have already essentially dealt with. We know that God does not exist in the material plane, at least solely in the material plane. If Allah wants to be in the material plane, He can be in the material plane. There is also a further theological question. Is there any theoretical plane? Is there any physical plane from the point of view of God, or is there only a physical plane of existence from our point of view, which is another question. But, I'm going to tell you about looking in a box. Now I'll sit down.
Sure.
That, say for instance, there is a box and it's a sealed box, and you have no idea what is in it. Until you open that box, right, anything in the whole world could be in there. Now, scientists had said for a long time, and they used this because they didn't want to get involved in discussions or arguments about whether or not God existed. So they used to sort of sneak out of the argument by saying, the realm of science is the physical world only. Science cannot see beyond. Their observational techniques and our theories do not go beyond the physical existence. So therefore, since God is beyond the physical existence, we have no responsibility for that area. We don't even discuss it. So here comes Einstein along, and he gives us our first tiny glimpse from the material existence into what exists beyond. It's like he just opens the door this tiny little bit, right? And we get this little look out into what is there. Now, theoretically, just as with the box, absolutely anything could be there. You look outside of space and time, anything could be there. Now this is really important because since anything could be there, what if you look outside space and time and you find these four things? Since it could have been anything, right? It isn't just a matter of, say for instance, you were looking to find these four primary attributes of God, and you sort of make up some theory about looking outside of physical existence, and say, and design it so that you find these. Scientists were not even expecting to ever get a look outside. So it wasn't like there was any expectation on what they would find. I mean, if you had an expectation, it changes scientifically the possible validity of it. But when you don't even have any idea what you're going to find there, and you happen to find these four primary attributes of God, if I can prove that that's what exists there, this is very compelling evidence. So, what I have already shown is that light does not exist outside of space and time. Next week's, the first talk next week, the Saturday talk next week, will be on the creation of the universe from the singularity at the beginning of the universe, which has been miscalled the Big Bang. And I'll go through all of the steps from the Big Bang up until the creation of Adam. And I will show how Allah has been responsible for each of those steps and how it is a logical progression following the unfolding of His plan. But when I am telling you about light next week, I'll just tell you this as a brief hint because it relates to this, and the question had been asked. I have plenty of time for this. That while light seems to exist in our physical world, I mean, I look outside the door, right? I see light. But I've already proven theoretically that light does not exist, and the theories are proved experimentally. So light really does not exist in the physical world, although we can, I'll say see it here, although it isn't really see it. I should say we can experience it here. What it appears is that light is the interface between the spiritual existence and the physical existence. And of course, this is consistent with Islamic thought, where angels are beings of light, and angels are sent by Allah to bring messages or to be sure that His will is carried out in the physical world. And whether or not, light actually we often call photons. A little bit, technically the name for light is photons of electromagnetic energy. And it covers other ranges of energy also, but we just call it light for convenience, and because it makes it more clear in the understanding of our theology. But I personally would have no difficulty considering photons, which I'll be talking about in a few minutes about how they carry information. Photons actually being somehow or other related to angels, because we don't know exactly the form of angels, and we do know that angels can take many forms. So it is possible that what we are calling photons may have some close relationship with angels. And before I finish dealing with this, I want to answer the question, which is going to come up, I think, in people's minds. Am I saying that God is light? Well, Allah has told us twice in the Quran that He is light, although there are various interpretations as to what He exactly means. One time He said, I am the light behind the light, or the light beyond the light, which people interpret, most scholars interpret as Allah is telling us that He is the light behind the light, that the light He is behind is the light of Nur Muhammad. The other place, which is, I think, more revealing in relationship to what we are talking about, Allah has told us, I am the light of the heavens and the earth. Allah has said, I am the light in the spiritual world, and I am the light in the physical world. But as to whether or not this actual light that we are perceiving is light, whether that is Allah, while it is the question that the answer I think remains open to further debate, I think that it is unlikely. And scholarly opinion is that the light that Allah is referring to Himself as being is what is called uncreated light. Now, we don't know exactly what uncreated light is. And that God as uncreated light, because we don't know what His essence is. So even if we could put a name on His essence, we still don't know what we're still no closer to knowing what it is. But that Allah has then created light. So the angels and light and photons and all of the electromagnetic radiation is the created light of Allah, which will become very important in next week's talk. So, we want to see then, if when we get our first glimpse through Einstein's special theory of relativity of that which exists beyond the material existence, beyond the material plane, beyond space, time, and matter, does it have these characteristics? The first one we've already dealt with, that light which exists beyond the material plane, because my proof that it doesn't exist in the material plane. So light then has eternal characteristics, because as you approach the speed of light, time slows. At the speed of light, time does not pass. What this actually, actually I'll just check this off, because we actually just know by experiment and by Einstein's theory that light is not involved in a flow of time. But then we say, well, what does this mean? Because it means something really important to the next one here. If you take a class in high school science and they talk about the speed of light, they'll say light gets from the sun to the earth in about 8 1/4 minutes, traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second, or 150 million kilometers roughly. What Einstein says is that it is not 8 1/4, it doesn't take light 8 1/4 minutes to get from the sun to the earth. From our point of view, an observer in our position at our speed in relationship to the earth and the sun where we are, if we look at our watch, 8 1/4 minutes will go by, no question. But that is not an absolute. It is not actually, if you were asked the question, how long does it take for light to get from the sun to the earth? The answer is, I can't answer that question, because it depends where you're observing from. So if they want to say it, if you as an observer here on Earth observe how long does it take, then I'll say 8 1/4 minutes. But if the question were just straight out, how long does it take, I'll say, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it changes depending on the speed, or the speed of you as an observer. So although, while I am watching light get from the sun to the earth, and we can actually measure this, they can measure individual groups of photons now leaving the sun, they measure them, they come to the earth 8 1/4 minutes very regularly, no problem at all. But what if you ask the question, from the point of view of the photon, how long does it take for the light to get from the sun to the earth? Right? What if the photon, the little bit of light energy, it has a little tiny photon watch, and it looks at its watch while it's getting from the sun to the earth? How much time passes on its watch? No time at all passes, because it's outside of time. So the light is it is at the surface of the sun, it is at the earth, it is at the other side of the universe, and it is everywhere in between, all simultaneously. It's in all places simultaneously, which is what the word omnipresent is about. To be all places at the same time. Omnipotent. Next week we'll go into the actual process of the beginning of the universe, but we have already discussed there was no space, no time, and no matter. And a singularity of light appeared, light energy. And that light energy was so great that it created not only the 10,000 billion stars that we can see, but that it created so many more times that number that we cannot see, that it is maybe unimaginable. So light had the power to be used by Allah to create that. I mean, can you imagine the amount of matter, right? Light creates subatomic particles. For the first thing, that light doesn't create a planet. Light creates, when I say light creates, I'm really saying Allah uses light to create. or light, or so. A planet is not created directly by light. The first thing that light creates is subatomic particles. Basically, the ones we're interested in is protons, neutrons, and electrons. They are really, really tiny. A little fingernail is very small, right? And there are at least billions and maybe trillions of subatomic particles make up a little fingernail. So if trillions make up a little fingernail, how many make up the Earth? How many make up the Sun and all the other planets around it? How many make up 10,000 billion star systems? How many subatomic particles make up all the other stars beyond that 10,000 billion that we can't see? A number that you know, I could write here for hours, and I'm not going to get that number written down. All of which come from the light energy. Not only did light create every bit of matter that exists, every single bit, every bit. I mean, there's not one bit of matter that exists that was not light. As a matter of fact, still is light, really. It was light in a changed form temporarily. But not only does did light create all of that matter, if it was not receiving energy through light, would cease to exist. So light is constantly, not only did it create all of those subatomic particles beyond a number I can write, but it is still constantly sustaining them by sending them little bits of energy, at least thousands, maybe millions of times per second. Not only did it create them all, not only does it sustain them all, but it gives them all information and tells them what to do. It directs their actions. So light then created all the physical existence, maintains all the physical existence, and directs the action of all the physical existence, which seems very much to be covered by the word omnipotent. Omniscient is a more complicated one. Omniscient being all knowledge, having all knowledge. It is a little bit hard to conceive of the photon being very smart. I'm thinking of a word now. Think of a word. Anybody know the Spanish word for milk? Okay. So all of you, you are a room full of human beings who do not in your brain have stored the information on what the Spanish word for milk is. I know what the Spanish word for milk is. Pronounced leche.
It means something in Malay.
Well, does it? I hope it's not rude.
Kind of, not really.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
It's all right.
Huh? Not at all efficient. How strange. And anyway, in Spanish, leche means milk. Now, can everybody say that word? Since you already know it. What's the Spanish word for milk?
Leche.
And then, when I erase it, what's the Spanish word for milk?
Leche.
So, 2 minutes ago, you were a room full of human beings who didn't have that word stored in your brain. Now you are a room full of human beings who have that word stored in your brain. What happened in the meantime? How did it get there? How was it stored in my brain? How did it get to your brain? How is it stored in your brain? See, and I'm not sure we know all of the technical detail yet about the actual processes involved, but at the micro level, I can tell you the processes involved. micro meaning the smallest level. Many years ago, when I lived in California and I lived in areas that were mainly Mexican American, I learned to speak quite a bit of Spanish. And so one of the words I learned was milk. And the way that we do not know exactly how words are stored in the brain in a physiological sense, but at the level of particle physics, I can tell you for sure what happens. Absolutely for sure, this thing I'm going to show you did happen. How it exactly happens and how it stores the word, I don't know, but I know this thing happens. Everybody's familiar with the basic structure of an atom. Has a nucleus in the center and electrons outside. So I'll draw a very simple one. Okay, so all atoms come in this form. They have a nucleus in the center. They don't, I mean, I don't want to trick you, they don't actually look like this. There are no little like things like planets circling the sun. We just draw them that way in chemistry books because it is convenient. Actually, if this was the shape of what is called the electron cloud, what that would mean is this electron, and this would be a sphere, not flat like that. This electron, at any given moment, has an equal probability of being anywhere within this sphere. That's the reality of how it works. But we draw it this way just for convenience. So this electron has this shell, which we draw this way. It has what is called a resting state. With the least amount of energy, with enough energy for this to exist as a hydrogen atom, where a proton is linked to an electron. With the least amount of energy, this which is called resting state, the shell is here. If enough energy comes in, which is essentially all energy that comes in is photons of electromagnetic energy or light, right? So I'll say as light energy comes in, when a sufficient amount of light comes in, this resting state will move from here to called the excited state. Technically, it's the first excited state. It could have others, but so in a way, this acts a little bit like a computer acts with a binary system. You could say that. Now, I'm not sure this is how it works, but it could be that the mind works this way. That in resting state, it is like zero, giving no information. Enough information comes in, reaches excited state, so it's a 1, so it's a 0 or 1. We could be using a binary process in the brain. We don't know that we are, but we could be. But I do know for sure that that as I tell you this word leche, which you all know now means milk, in your brains, some electrons moved from a resting state to an excited state. They absolutely had to, or no change could have taken place. We know change took place because you know the word. So, I mean, just physically, according to the laws of particle physics, what I'm describing here had to take place. So, however this stores information, it does store information. We don't know the actual process as physiology and biology, but I do know at the particle level of physics that this did happen. So, Somehow or other, when I was a young teenager, I learned the word leche is milk in Spanish. And therefore, I had some alteration in the energy levels of certain electrons around certain nuclei of certain atoms in my brain. At what higher physiological levels that this memory took place, we don't know yet. So it's stuck in there for a long time. And then today, I sit here and I want to tell you a Spanish word, and some of you have seen several of my talks, and so I have to keep changing the Spanish word. So I thought, which one will it be today? So somehow or other, I sort through in my brain to find out a word that I don't think I've used before, and maybe people won't know, and then I pick that one out. So once I decide on the word leche, I then send it down my efferent nerves, the nerves going from the brain to various parts of the body. So I send message. Now these are little bits of light energy. The nerve from my brain, wherever that information is stored, to my vocal cord is made up of neurons. And these neurons are made up of molecules, and these molecules are made up of atoms. These atoms work like this, and from atom to atom, down that neuron is passed little bits of light energy. A little bit of light passes from every atom to every atom on the way down there to my vocal cords. Gets to my vocal cords and tells my vocal cords to vibrate at a certain frequency. Once again, how exactly it happens we don't know, but I do know that the messages to my vocal cords came in little bits of light energy that at the particle level gave information to the atoms making up my vocal cords, which somehow or other gets interpreted as vibrate at a certain frequency. These vocal cords then vibrating in a certain frequency, they are in my throat, and also in my throat is air. As these vocal cords vibrate, they bump against air molecules. When the vocal cords bump against the air molecules, they pass a little bit of light energy from atoms in my vocal cords to atoms in the air molecules. The atoms in the air molecules act a little bit like billiard balls. They hit one, and that one hits some others, until every single, in this whole room, every single air molecule has been given a little bit of light energy, telling it that the Spanish word for milk is leche. But it tells even more than that, right? It tells that the person who is speaking has a male voice, has a somewhat American-sounding accent, perhaps. And if I wanted to put emotion in it, if I say, leche, you know, you'd think, oh, he doesn't like milk. Or, oh, leche. You see? So, all of these things, they are imparted by light. By little tiny photons of light energy carry all of that information. So they go through every single air molecule in the whole room. Some of those air molecules go into your ears and they bump against your eardrums. And they give a little bit of light energy to your eardrum, carrying all of this information. And they tell your eardrum to vibrate at a certain frequency. And when your eardrum vibrates at a certain frequency, there's 3 little bones in the middle ear that get moved by this also, the hammer, the stirrup, and the anvil, and I'm not sure the order they're in anymore. But these 3 little bones transmit from one bone to the other, atom by atom, in every bone, that little bit, a tiny bit of information in light, by light, bumps against the outside of the inner ear, which is another drum-like thing called the cochlea. It then vibrates. Inside the cochlea, it looks like a liquid, but I believe it is sodium crystals so fine that they act and look like a liquid. And these sodium crystals, they are so tiny, they are there are molecules of just a very few atoms each. And every one of these gets this information, a little bit of light. So every one of them is vibrating in there, with that light energy. And then coming from the actual auditory nerve into the cochlea, there are little hairs in the cochlea. And these little hairs get bumped against by the sodium crystals. And these little hairs are actually directly nerve endings out of the auditory nerve. So these sodium crystals bump against those little hairs, pass on little bits of light energy. This light energy then goes up the auditory nerve, passing from atom to atom and raising the energy levels of atom to atom in a certain way, in a certain dynamic pattern that conveys all of this information, leche, male voice, American accent, whether there's emotion or not in it, until it goes into your brain, goes to wherever information is stored in your brain, alters some energy levels in your brain, and now every one of you, what's the Spanish word for milk? So, not only that, remember I told you earlier when I was talking about what light does when we were talking about its omnipotence, that light is sending information to every single subatomic particle in the whole universe at every moment, giving it information about what to do. It also sends information to groups of subatomic particles like atoms, and it sends information to groups of subatomic particles like molecules, and it sends information to bigger groups than molecules, biological life forms, and it sends information to human beings, all sent by light. All the information in the physical universe is stored and transmitted by light, which seems to pretty much cover the definition of omniscience. There is no knowledge other than that which is stored and transmitted by light. So what we have here then is a situation where when we get our first look outside of space and time through Einstein's special theory of relativity, and we could have found anything in the whole world, we find light existing there that just happens to have the four qualities that are considered the primary qualities of God. Now, if that is not a very, very powerful proof, direct, powerful scientific proof of the existence of God, I don't know what is. I mean, you know, as we said earlier, what does it take to prove God exists? Well, I guess to prove that his attributes exist, because his essence is unknowable to us. So I'm not going to be able to prove his essence to you. I don't know what his essence is. We don't know what his essence is. His essence, if it is unknowable, is probably unseeable. What can we say about it? It is just unknowable. So we have to know God through his attributes. The world's religions, including Islam, would include these being the primary attributes of God. Obviously, nothing but God has these attributes, with the possible exception of when God, say there are two possibilities, and I want to say there are two possibilities, and I don't know for sure which one it is. When God tells us he is light, right? God might be light in a way that we don't understand yet. And God might be exactly this light that we are seeing, and our existence may be something so different than it appears to us to be, that the question as to, is God this light we see coming from the sun, is not even a real question. That the actual reality of our existence is so different from that God could be actually light. The other possibility is God is the creator of light. And God did not only breathe his spirit into Adam, but God breathed his spirit into the angels. And when God breathed his spirit into the angels being, the human beings being made of light, Allah, when he breathes his spirit in, can only breathe in some small number of his attributes in some small portion, because we are relative and very limited beings. If Allah were to try and breathe into us all of his attributes in their full portion, I think it would destroy us. We are not physically capable of accepting that. Because of the nature of light, whether Allah created the light or Allah is the light, light seems to have the ability to accept attributes in a full portion. So what we are seeing is that whatever exists beyond the material plane exhibits the primary attributes that everybody has attributed to God. I mean, everybody's quiet. I don't know whether you find this quite as amazing as I do, but like I said before, we could have found anything there. We weren't looking for this. We weren't expecting to find this. And we find that Einstein's special theory of relativity tells us real clearly that light does not exist in the physical existence. So we look at the special characteristics of light, and light has the four primary attributes that have been attributed to God, and light is outside the physical existence in what we might call the spiritual world, or the world beyond the physical. So that is the scientific proof of the existence of God. Does anybody feel like they might like to ask any questions or anything?
Too many questions.
Yes, sister. Sorry, it's hard to... No, I just have to check on the time. What time do we start? 9:30, we go to 12. Okay, yeah. I think we have some time for questions, because it is very interesting right now, after having said something like this, I think, for people to hear some questions. And sometimes maybe I haven't explained everything that I could, or I haven't explained it as well as I could. So ask a few questions.
My
But
first question is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. So if you're talking about that He exists outside of time, where does that fit in? My second question is that...
well, no, let's do one question at a time, because my memory is not so good, obviously. I think that it is, while in Islam we have scholars and individuals who make many different interpretations of the words in the Quran, it is generally accepted by scholars that this 6 days is not referring to 6 days in any way at all like we consider 6 days. And two different places in the Quran, different amounts of time are given. A day is like 1,000 years, and a day is like 50,000 years, I think. I'm not sure. I think that's the two numbers. What the scholars have said is that we are not to consider Allah in any way at all involved in time as we know it. So none of these numbers have any meaning in the sense of time as we know them. And scholars have said that the 6 days is really much more likely referring to 6 periods of time or 6 stages. So that's my answer to the first question.
But if you're talking about, say, when you're talking about days, it represents time. It's still what's if you're talking about that periods of time, sometimes indicate time again. But if you're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists beyond time,
Okay.
the creation.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get your question, and I have an answer for this also. I mean, I don't know how satisfactory my answer is going to be, but it has to do with I have said many times, and I still hold quite to this belief, that since finding the information from Einstein's theories of relativity, which are the first time ever, you see, all scientific theories before that were materialistic theories. They were theories from the relative existence. Einstein's theories are the first ones about the absolute existence. So they are of a different category. All the first ones can have a possibility of changing and be wrong because they were relative to start with. Einstein should not have a chance to be wrong because they started from their observations of the absolute rather than the relative. Then So what I have said is, because this is the case, and because this changes our view of reality so greatly, I mean, like I pointed out from the very beginning, it has totally destroyed any possibility of secular materialism being correct. So what I have said is, every question that has ever been asked and answered needs to be re-asked and re-answered on the basis of the new worldview we have now, which I would call the quantum relativistic reality. In other words, we have a different perspective of reality now, which is probably an accurate perspective of reality. Before, when all questions were asked, in all due respect to the early scholars in Islam, they had to answer questions in their interpretation, in their analysis of Quran, on the basis of a worldview that included, unless they had some spiritual experiences otherwise, that included only the information from the physical world and not information from that which was beyond. So I think questions like you are asking, they come to a very deep theological question. How does God, who is not involved in time, do things that from our point of view take time? In other words, from our point of view, the universe is about 14 or 15 billion years old, and Allah has created it, sustained it, directed it, gone through all sorts of stages, and ended up with us here discussing it today. What does it mean for a being who is not involved in time to do something? The word do implies time. So I think my answer is, we cannot answer your question at the moment, but that your question is not the question it appears to be. You see, it appears to be, how can, isn't this a discrepancy? Allah did this in time, but he is outside of time. What I'm saying is, in the future, we may understand it differently, so that Allah is rather than talk about Allah, that we may not be in time other than from our point of view. Does that have any meaning to you? This world may not exist other than from our point of view.
I'm just thinking about it in the way that, say, for non-Muslims to ask me a question, how would I respond?
Yes. I would say to non-Muslims, because it's important, I think, to be honest with our answers, and scholars. I think I'm not sure that it was Imam Shafi, but it may have been Imam Shafi who once. Some people in a community, like several thousand kilometers from where, say for instance, was Imam Shafi, several thousand kilometers from where Imam Shafi was, they had a number of theological questions about Islam that were very important to them. And they got all their money together to send one young scholar to meet with Imam Shafi and ask this list of 60 or so questions. And so he travels for, 4 or 5 months, and he gets there, and it was a big burden on the community. And he gets to Imam Shafi, and he says, I have these 60 questions that we want to ask you, and Imam Shafi says, okay, go ahead. And he starts asking the questions. And he asks the first question, Imam Shafi says, I don't know. And he asks the next question, Imam Shafi says, I don't know. And out of the 60 questions or so, only 7 or 8 questions does Imam Shafi answer. And the man is he's the scholar who came, he's like devastated, right? The community put all this time and effort and money into this. And he says, well, what am I going to do? The community sent me, they put all their resources in this. What am I going to say to them when I go back to the community? And he said, tell them Imam Shafi does not know. The point of this being, in Islam, we're not obligated to know all the answers. And we should feel free to, when we are talking with people of other religions, to say, that, that part of our belief system in Islam is that there are many things we just don't know yet. And we don't feel any obligation. So Imam Shafi would not make up his best answer. He would just say, I don't know. As I had to say to this question here. If someone asks me about the essence of Allah, I just have to say, I don't know. So I think that what we should say in a situation like this is something like, this is a very deep theological question that scholars are still considering, that it is difficult to understand how a being who is not involved in time, Allah, can do things which involve time. And we have not actually resolved that answer yet, but based on new scientific findings, we are perhaps getting closer to an answer than we have been before. And as soon as that answer is available, we would love to give it to you.
Can I ask you a second question?
Sure.
Okay, my second question is about when you talked about protons and how everything is made out of light, right? And it just kind of makes me reflect on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, that how human beings are created from the lowest of, in terms of form, which is clay. So I think it's more like a reflection that can actually give a response with regards to that. When I think about how that people make things from the lowest form, which is clay and all these things, and they make it, transform it into something that has got the power, the ability to transform people and the environment. Like for example, computers. We use those forms, we make it into something more sophisticated, and it gives you kind of that reflection that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He's created you from the lowest form, but has given you the ability to go higher than that.
Yes.
And so is it, when you're saying that the particles are different forms, they take different forms, light takes different forms, so clay is like a form of light, but one of the lowest forms. You can say something like that. So maybe you'd like to give that response on that, this thing about being transformed to a higher being that can be higher than angels or lower than animals.
Yes. Okay. When it is said that we are made of the lowest form, clay, the term clay, while there are people who interpret Quran and they want to say it is some particular wet clay from some particular part of somewhere on the world, they want to get that specific. Then there are people who are on the other end of interpretation, where I probably am, where I want to say the word clay is symbolic of the basic material stuff of the universe. That this is what is being referred to as the clay. And that when I said earlier that everything is made of light, that actually what happens when I mean, this is really part of next week's lecture, but I'll just say a little bit now. When at the beginning of the universe, when light changes into matter, light falls from an absolute state, a state of perfection, into a state of great imperfection, exhibiting from being able to exhibit somewhat perfectly some of the attributes of Allah to being able to exhibit virtually none of the attributes of Allah. The attributes are there in their potential, but they are not there in their ability to be expressed. And then Allah seems to then be taking the whole physical existence and building upon it stage by stage until He sets the stage for the creation of Adam, where all of these stages are further progressions on the ability of this lowest matter to increasingly express the attributes that Allah has put into matter, even in its lowest form as clay. But when we get to then be human beings, we have the opportunity to rise all the way up to the fullness of the expression of these characteristics back as light when we leave the physical world. And within the physical world, we can get very close to these characteristics, all as clay. So it seems that Allah has used this medium, which was called the lowest, You know, the angels, some said the angels were the highest because they were light, and the jinn were higher than us because they were fire, but we don't know exactly what the jinn are yet. We don't know exactly what that fire means, beings of fire. But we are the lowest because we are clay, meaning we are the material stuff of existence. And the whole purpose of Allah's plan seems to be to take light in its perfected state, drop it down into a very low state, take responsibility himself for progressively developing stages of that low state to more and more be able to express the attributes that had been put into low matter through light until you get to Adam, and then Adam is given the choice to fulfill the ability of low matter to express high characteristics. We have any other questions? Yes. Yes, brother.
I'd like to develop on the question that sister asked. If the man, as we know, is made from clay, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran said that indeed man is created in the best form, then I mean, how do you reconcile these two, clay and then ahsan taqweem?
Yep.
And knowing the drama that man, I mean Adam alayhi salam, was firstly inhabiting the heaven, and then somehow he made some mistakes, of course, and then he was transferred down to earth.
Okay.
Ahsan taqweem.
Two things. One, that man is made of the best of form. It appears, well, I'll just deal with that part first. It appears that from the subatomic particles in the beginning of the universe that Allah created through light, through all of the various stages that Allah created between those subatomic particles and Adam, there were millions and millions and millions of different stages, progressively in a progression towards Adam. The final form being the sort of end point of God's plan was to create Adam. So this is what I think it means that Adam was created in the best of form. Of all of the forms available in the physical existence, Adam is the best form. Adam was created in the best form. And the other one, I actually discussed this yesterday, which has to do with, can you just briefly say the second part again, the second part of the question?
Man is created in best form, the other form is created in the clay. So how do you reconcile these two?
Oh, no, I remember the second part though, that's really the first part again still. The second part was essentially that Adam was according to Revelation, created in paradise, and fell from paradise. Yeah. What it appears is that when Allah creates a soul and links it to a physical body in a human being, that what Allah is doing is giving that soul a chance. The soul starts perfect, but Allah did not want, the reason that Allah created Adam to be his Khalifa, or created a Khalifa on earth, was because everything else that Allah created to do exactly as He said. But to fulfill His plan, apparently, Allah wanted to create a form that did not have to fulfill His plan, but could fulfill His plan, but had to do so by free will or choice. So Allah then links a perfect soul to a human being, which then has that opportunity to have an existence in the material world, to become a perfected soul again by their own choice. See, the soul starts perfected by Allah. So Allah has just made it perfect. He could have just left it perfect if he wanted to just leave it perfect. But he then has the soul spend a time in the physical existence to ensure that this soul can earn a rightful place in paradise, because we may have a role in paradise that we don't understand yet. And that role may require that we have chosen by our free will to be perfect in our following of the will of Allah, as opposed to just do it because Allah made us do it. So this is my answer to that. So that is our second talk. For those who would like to have a CD of these talks each week, like next week, the first two talks will be available on CD if you would like to have copies to keep and to review from, or to give to friends or whatever. And next week's first talk will be on the creation of the universe, from the light at the beginning of the universe until Adam. And other than that, I thank you very much for letting me have this talk with you. And of course, you know, we have to realize I am touching, and questions I am being asked are touching on the very edge of our knowledge of Islam and our knowledge of science. So I'm making no claim to any perfect knowledge of any of this. Allah will know whether or not I'm correct. I'm trying to do my best in these answers. And for every case, if I am wrong, I apologize to Allah. And for everything I'm right in, I am greatly blessed by Allah to have the opportunity to tell you an important truth. So thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum.